The twin moons of Varos. 3 hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the burning colony below. Smoke coiled into the night, carrying the scent of charred metal and death. From his vantage point on a jagged ridge, Captain Jace Mercer watched through his rifle scope as the Draxi, hulking, reptilian warriors clad in dark battle armor, moved methodically through the ruined settlement. Their curved blades gleamed under the firelight as they slaughtered any human survivors too slow to escape. Jace's trigger finger twitched, but he forced himself to wait. There were too many of them, and he was only one man. A sniper's job wasn't to fight battles. It was to end them before they started. His rifle, the M92 long sight, rested steady against his shoulder, its enhanced optics feeding real-time battlefield data to his HUD. The colony had fallen, but this wasn't over. Not yet. A burst of static crackled in his earpiece before resolving into the calm, clipped voice of Colonel Grayson. "Mercer, Sitrep." Jace exhaled slowly. Colonies lost. No signs of organized resistance. Civilians wiped out or taken. A pause. Then, damn it, another pause. "We have intel suggesting the raiders have a hidden staging ground nearby. Likely a temporary base. We can't let them dig in, or this will be just the first of many attacks. You're the only operative close enough to recon and neutralize." Jace finished for him. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, eyes still locked on the enemy below. "How much time do I have?" "Not much. Our scans show increased comm traffic. They're planning something bigger." Jace's jaw tightened. He scanned the settlement one last time before slipping back into the shadows, moving with practiced efficiency. Every step down the rocky incline was measured, boots silent against the stone. The Draxi weren't just raiders. They were hunters, adept at tracking their prey. If they got wind of him before he found their hideout, it would be over. The settlement faded behind him as he moved through the outer forest. Towering trees, their bark like blackened steel, stretched into the sky, their canopies blotting out the moons. The wind carried distant alien howls, the sounds of predators lurking in the deeper woods. He moved quickly but cautiously, using natural cover, his rifle always at the ready. An hour passed before he found what he was looking for. Through a gap in the foliage, nestled within a derelict industrial complex, figures moved, tall, armored, reptilian. A Draxi encampment, half hidden beneath rusted metal structures. Jace adjusted his scope, dialing in magnification. They were setting up a fortified perimeter, laying down sentry turrets and motion sensors. At the center of the camp stood Commander Zirak, a towering brute with a deep, jagged scar running down the side of the scaled face. He carried himself with an air of brutal confidence, barking orders in his guttural tongue. Jace's HUD translated in real time. More humans escaped than expected. Their forces are regrouping. We must strike again before they retaliate. Jace's stomach twisted. The Draxi weren't finished. They planned to wipe out the remaining refugees before they could reach safety. He steadied his breathing. He couldn't take out an entire raiding force alone. But he didn't have to. Not if he hunted them smartly. He marked priority targets, officers, radio operators, heavy gunners. One by one, he'd pick them apart, disrupt their chain of command, and turn them against each other. A sentry stood atop a rusted tower, scanning the tree line. Jace exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot was barely a whisper. The Draxias had snapped back, his body crumpling without a sound. Jace shifted position before the body even hit the ground. Seconds later, he saw them react. 2 Draxi warriors rushed toward the fallen sentry, weapons raised. Their heads swiveled in confusion, scanning the dark forest. They muttered to each other, wary. Jace adjusted his aim. Another shot. A second Draxi dropped, gurgling, his throat blown out. The 3rd warrior recoiled, backing away, shouting something in his language. The camp stirred. Zirak turned sharply, eyes narrowing. They still didn't know where he was. Jay slid further along the ridge, careful not to leave a pattern. He had to make them doubt, make them afraid. The Draxi thrived on dominance and overwhelming force. Strip that away, and they were just animals on the defensive. A spotlight flared to life, sweeping across the forest. Jace ducked low, crawling into denser brush. They were searching for him now. That was fine. The first kill had sent them into disarray. The second had made them angry. Now, Jace Mercer needed them afraid. Lying prone atop a craggy outcrop, he kept his breathing slow, heart rate steady. His rifle scope flicked between targets as the Draxi Raiders scrambled below, their guttural voices rising in confusion. A spotlight swept across the tree-line, hunting for him, but Jace had already repositioned. He knew their eyes were sharp, their reflexes honed by countless hunts, but they weren't trained for this. They weren't trained to fight an enemy they couldn't see. He adjusted his aim. A radio operator stood near the command tent, his back to the chaos, focused on relaying orders. Jace exhaled. One shot. The alien's head snapped forward, body slumping against console. Sparks flared from shattered electronics as the equipment shorted out. Now they couldn't coordinate. The camp erupted. Warriors bellowed orders, weapons raised, scanning the darkness. Commander Zirak moved among them, his presence alone forcing them into order. He was smart. He wouldn't allow panic. Jace watched as Zirak barked command, sending groups into the trees in stagger formations. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were hunting. Jace moved. Fast. He slid down the rocky incline, boots barely whispering against the stone. A sniper's strength wasn't just in the shot. It was in control. He had to stay ahead of their movements, predict their tactics before they executed them. If they boxed him in, he'd be finished. As he reached the tree-line, he tapped his wrist console, activating sound disruptors placed earlier. A burst of static rang out from the opposite side of the valley, mimicking human comm chatter. The Draxi froze, head snapping toward the sound. Zirak raised a fist. There! They have reinforcements. One of them growled in their native tongue. Jay smirked. They thought he wasn't alone. Good. As the raiders diverted half their forces toward the decoy, he used the distraction to slip deeper into the forest. The terrain worked against him here. Dense underbrush, uneven ground, too many places for a predator to lurk. The Draxi were agile in this environment, their powerful legs built for bursts of speed. If they got too close, it wouldn't be a fight, it would be a slaughter. He reached a natural rock formation and climbed, pressing his body low against the cool stone. From here, he had a clear vantage point over the warriors fanning out below. Their search was methodical, relentless. Zirak wasn't letting this go. Jace needed to make them hesitate. He switched to armor-piercing rounds. A heavy gunner trailed behind the others, lugging a plasma repeater nearly as big as Jace himself. A single shot wouldn't drop him, but two would. Jace fired. The first round punched through the alien's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second tore through his helmet, sending him sprawling. The roar of the plasma repeater was instant. The body hadn't even hit the ground before another Draxi picked up the fallen weapon and fired wildly into the ridge, emerald bolts shredding rock and foliage. Jace had already moved. Dirt and shrapnel rained over him as he slid down the opposite side of the rock face. He hit the ground running, zigzagging through the trees. His ghillie cloak shimmered, adjusting its camouflage to match the environment, but it wouldn't fool them up close. He needed another vantage point. His earpiece crackled. Mercer, what's your status? Colonel Grayson. Jace kept running, still breathing, engaged. They're throwing everything they have at me. We're picking up heat signatures, closing on your position. They're pulling in patrols from the outskirts. You need an exit. No exit, Jace muttered, dodging behind a fallen log. Not yet. A Draxi scout broke from the tree-line ahead, plasma pistol raised. Jace didn't stop. He dropped low, rolling under the first shot, came up on one knee, and fired point-blank. The scout's chest plate shattered, the force of the impact sending him staggering backward. A second shot finished him before he could call for help. Jace checked his ammo. 7 rounds left. Not enough. A low, guttural snarl made him freeze. He turned slowly. A Draxi commando stood just a few meters away, cloaked in a predator's shimmer field. His outline flickered against the backdrop of the trees, his plasma blade igniting in a deep, pulsing blue. This one was different. Jace reacted first, snapping his rifle up. Too late. The commando lunged, slashing low. Jace twisted, barely avoiding the blade. but the heat seared through his armor, leaving a scorched gash along his side. Pain flared. He gritted his teeth, rolled backward, and fired mid-motion. The shot missed. The commando was too fast. Jace abandoned the rifle. Close quarters wasn't his style, but he wasn't defenseless. His combat knife was in his hand in an instant, just as the Draxi lunged again. This time, Jace stepped in. He caught the alien's wrist mid-strike, twisted hard, and drove his knife up under the armor plating, straight into the soft flesh of the throat. The commando's snarl turned into a gurgle. Hot blood spilled over Jace's glove. Jace yanked the blade free and let the body drop. His chest heaved, the burn along his side pulsing. He had to move. He retrieved his rifle and took off toward the old refinery ruins beyond the tree line. If he could force the Draxi into the narrow industrial corridors, he could control the fight. Behind him, the forest came alive with movement. They were still coming. Good. The ruins of the old refinery loomed ahead, jagged steel towers rising against the night sky like the bones of some long-dead beast. Rusted catwalks crisscrossed above, shadowed alcoves and collapsed corridors, providing perfect places to disappear. Jace Mercer pushed through the pain in his side and sprinted toward the shattered remains of a loading dock, rifle held tight against his chest. Behind him, the Draxi hunters spread through the trees, their guttural voices carrying through the dark. They had lost too many already, and now they were out for blood. He vaulted over a pile of twisted metal, landing in a crouch inside what had once been a maintenance bay. His breathing was controlled, his movements calculated. He was no longer a soldier on the run. He was a predator in his den. The first Draxi warrior entered the refinery's perimeter, moving cautiously. Jace let him take 2 more steps before squeezing the trigger. The shot punched through the alien's chest, sending him crumpling onto the cracked concrete. His body hadn't even settled before Jace shifted positions, disappearing into the maze of rusted scaffolding. The remaining raiders hesitated. They were learning. Slowly, Jace climbed onto an overhead walkway, pressing his back against a support beam. Below, the hunting party moved carefully, weapons raised. Their leader, Commander Zirak, stood among them, his massive frame coiled with restrained fury. His voice cut through the silence, a guttural growl thick with authority. He's playing in the shadows. Drive him out. A warrior knelt and activated a motion scanner, the small device emitting a pulse across the refinery. Jace barely moved in time, dropping through a hole in the metal grating just as the scanner swept over his previous position. They were adapting. Good. That would make breaking them even more satisfying. Jace landed silently on an old conveyor belt and moved quickly, keeping his rifle tight to his shoulder. He needed to disrupt their formation, turn their tactics against them. He spotted an overhead fuel line, still intact despite years of neglect. A well-placed shot could turn it into a firestorm. He adjusted his aim. 1 shot. The pipeline erupted, a plume of burning vapor engulfing 3 Draxi in a wall of flame. Their screeches tore through the night, their armor melting against their flesh as they collapsed in agony. The others scattered, momentarily blind from the explosion. Jace was already moving, using the chaos to reposition. He dropped into a narrow corridor lined with rusting storage tanks, heart hammering but his mind clear. 3 down. Zirak was still out there. Jace reloaded, each movement precise. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was justice. A low, rumbling snarl echoed to the refinery. Jace slowed his breathing. The commander was close. Zirak wasn't like the others. He had survived wars, led raids, crushed entire colonies. He wasn't a mindless beast to be toyed with. He was a hunter, and he was hunting now. Jay stepped into an open space between the towering storage tanks. Silence. Then, a blur of motion. Zirak struck like a warhammer, barreling into Jace with bone-crushing force. The impact sent him flying. His rifle ripped from his grip as he crashed hard against the ground. His vision blurred, pain lancing through his ribs. Too fast. Zirak was on him before he could rise. The Draxi commander loomed above, plasma blade igniting in a deadly blue glow. His yellow eyes gleamed in the firelight, his breath a low, seething growl. "You've taken much from me, Zirak rumbled. Now, I return the favor. Jace rolled just as the plasma blade slashed down, searing into the concrete where he had been moments before. He grabbed for his combat knife, but Zirak kicked him hard, sending him sprawling again. He was toying with him. Jace refused to die like prey. He forced himself up, twisting at the last second as Zirak lunged again. The plasma blade grazed his shoulder, heat searing through his armor, but Jace ignored the pain. He used the momentum, pivoting and driving his knife into Zirak's side. The Draxi commander roared, staggering back as dark blood spilled from the wound. But he didn't fall. He was too strong, too enraged. Jace dug for his rifle. Fingers closed around the grip just as Zirak charged again. He didn't have time to line up a shot. Instead, he jammed the barrel against Zirak's chest and fired point-blank. The armor-piercing round punched through, blood spraying across the rusted walls. Zirak stumbled, gasping, his massive frame shuddering. He dropped to one knee, claws scraping against the floor. Jace didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle, pressed the barrel to Zirak's forehead, and fired again. The Draxi warlord collapsed, his body twitching once before going still. The last remnants of his command died with him. Jace exhaled, forcing himself to his feet. His muscles ached, his wounds burned, but he was still standing. That was all that mattered. He activated his comm, target eliminated. Colonel Grayson's voice came through, steady and relieved. Understood. Sending retrieval team now. Jace looked down at Zirak's lifeless body, then toward the ruins where the rest of the Draxi had fallen. The hunt was over, but the war wasn't. The air still carried the scent of burnt metal and blood as Jace Mercer stood over the wreckage of the battle. Smoke curled from the ruined refinery, the fires beginning to die down, leaving only the scorched remains of the Draxi war party. Their bodies lay scattered, the once fear hunters now nothing more than lifeless husks beneath the pale light of Varos III's twin moons. Jace's breathing was steady, though every inch of him ached. His wounds throbbed, but the pain was distant, buried beneath the sharp clarity of victory. He holstered his rifle, stepping over a shattered steel beam as his comms crackled to life. "Mercer, Sitrep," came Colonel Grayson's voice, edged with urgency. Jace surveyed the battlefield once more before responding. Zirak's down. Camps neutralized. No survivors. A brief pause. Then, copy that. Extraction inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Jace nodded to himself, even though no one could see it. He had bought humanity time, but he knew this wouldn't be the last of them. The Draxi were relentless, their raids designed to instill fear, to make humans feel like prey in their own colonies. But tonight had proven something different. Tonight, the hunters had been hunted. A distant rumble cut through the silence. Jace turned his head, spotting the faint glow of dropship thrusters cutting across the sky. The retrieval team was close. He let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. The mission was over. Or at least, this part of it was. A faint sound drew his attention. He turned, rifle instinctively raising, then froze. From behind the wreckage of collapsed wall, a young boy stepped forward. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dust, but his eyes were sharp, wide with something that wasn't quite fear. He couldn't have been more than 12, yet he stood with the quiet resolve of someone who had already seen too much. Jace lowered his rifle. "You alone?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Jace scanned the area, but there were no others. No family, no survivors. Just a boy, standing in the midst of a battlefield that should have consumed him. "You saw what happened here?" Jace asked, though he already knew the answer. The boy swallowed before speaking. "I saw you kill them." His voice was steady, but there was something else beneath it. Understanding. Not shock, not horror, just a grim acceptance of someone who had learned, far too young, what survival really meant. Jace crouched to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated again. Run. Jace repeated, testing the name. He glanced at the ruins around them, then back at the boy. "You're tougher than you look." Ren said nothing, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. A quiet defiance flickered in his expression, One Jace recognized all too well. It wasn't the look of a victim. It was the look of someone who refused to be broken. The dropship engines grew louder, the wind kicking up dust and debris as the retrieval team prepared to land. Jace rose to his feet, offering a hand. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Ren stared at it for a moment, then slowly reached out, gripping Jace's hand. His fingers were small, but his grip was firm. As Jace led him toward the approaching dropship, he cast one last glance at the battlefield. The Draxi had come here expecting an easy victory. They had believed humanity was weak, that they could strike and vanish without consequence. But they had been wrong. Jace didn't fight for revenge. He didn't fight for glory. He fought because someone had to remind the monsters lurking in the dark that humanity wouldn't kneel. Tonight, that message had been delivered, and judging by the look in Ren's eyes, it had been received.